Teresa, you'll enjoy meeting this next guy. He's an absolute encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to presidents, American history. He has many comments on this country and what's going on the world stage. He had a show on KGO, and we excitedly bring him in every Wednesday. And I will tell you that you should also subscribe to his podcast, which is called Around the Political World with John Rothman. He is John Rothman. Hi, John.
How are you? By the way, I loved your mention of Johnny Mathis. I want to point out he was a graduate of my alma mater, George Washington High School in San Francisco.
Right. Mathis
so we have Nick Wilmerdine, we have George Washington High School. Tell you, we're really rolling here. Where did you go to high school, Mark?
I was in Washington, D.C. Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in Washington, D.C. But I will tell you that I believe his high school years, and you can confirm this maybe, I don't think he's a contemporary of yours, but you might just know that he was a track star, as I recall.
He was a track star, and you must know that when San Francisco State University, where he went to school, San Francisco College, needed a track, he donated the money for the track. And I want to also tell you that he has been extremely generous with Washington High School, and he has contributed whenever we've asked for any help, and he's just a phenomenal guy.
No, it's cool. He seemed really, really well.
Can I just point out, Teresa, just so you know this, I became president of the George Washington High School Alumni Association 50 years ago in May, and I am retiring after 50 years this May. And so I've been very familiar with Washington High School and all of its comings and goings.
Yeah,
well, congratulations on a fruitful long term.
Yeah. And he's
I'm hoping somebody will nominate
mayor of San Francisco, aren't you, John?
Yes, I was mayor of San Francisco in Youth in Government Day in 1966, the best run day in the history of San Francisco. I should also point out, I was also Emperor Norton in the Court of Historical Review. So when you refer to me, it should be Mr. President, Your Imperial Majesty.
Wow.
And, I can think of a few other accolades that I could throw my own way.
Well, that's
Your Majesty. Your Majesty, but you're familiar with Lick Wilmerding, where I went to school.
I certainly am. My niece and nephew went to Lick. I had many friends who went to Lick. I even remember, I hate to say this, I'm old enough to remember when Lick was tuition free.
No.
Wow.
So that was the whole point.
When I was there, they had a motto, head, heart, and hands, and all of the students had to take trade classes. I'm the daughter of a mechanic, so I had to take electric shop, machine shop, wood shop, drafting 1 and 2. Every student had to take all of those.
And may I say, your husband and your children are obviously very lucky to have such a handy wife and mother.
Wow, how about that? John always laying it on thick early. And then usually late. He is a politician. You don't realize this, Teresa, probably, because this wouldn't be on your radar. But many in our chat, many who sort of are devotees of John Rothman, they feel he should run for mayor of San Francisco now. He should throw himself into that race. And I think John, if I can say this, I don't mean to. I think John enjoys that question and kind of, oh, come on, John, please run, more than he would actually enjoy running. Wouldn't you agree with that?
There has been a draft Rothman movement, and I'm delighted to report that it still exists. But I always ask the question, if you're a film buff, you remember at the end of the movie The Candidate, Robert Redford is run for the Senate. Nobody thinks he can win. He wins. In the last line of the film, he turns to his campaign manager, having won the election, and asks, now what do I do?
Right. Right. That wouldn't be a problem with you, but
no, it certainly wouldn't.
But there is that, All right. Now, let me ask you quickly about 2 things that were on television, I believe, last night. One of which was the California Senate debate for the Feinstein seat that is vacant. Did you catch any of it, or do you have any thoughts on it?
I did, and it's very interesting. Adam Schiff will certainly get one of the spots. The battle now is for number 2. And that is between Katie Porter, who is a Democrat, as you know, and the former champion of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who's running as a Republican. But I just want to make this clear, and you should interview him, by the way, Mark. He's a very interesting interview. But the point is that now we don't vote for a Democrat and a Republican. We vote for the 2 who get into the top position. So I hope that Garvey gets in, runs against Adam Schiff, and the people of California really have a choice, not an echo.
All right. then let's pivot to speaking of an echo, Donald Trump sitting down with Sean Hannity.
No, it was Laura Ingraham.
Oh,
and
Laura
it was
Ingraham.
1 hour between 4 and 5.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Well, clearly you're familiar with it. So please speak more on this, because what I saw was just he was literally just inventing stuff on NATO, on everything, on the document
comparing himself
thing.
to the recently murdered Putin's latest victim,
Navalny.
Look, what can I tell you? This is it's a travesty. He didn't really answer Laura Ingraham's questions. He evaded them. He was playing to his audience. They had, at best, several hundred people there, all of whom were Trump supporters. And what did we learn? Not a heck of a lot, except that it appears, because this Saturday we will see the election in the primary in South Carolina. Donald Trump will in all likelihood win that vote. The latest poll shows him 30 points ahead of Nikki Haley, who comes from South Carolina. And it will be very interesting to see, because it will essentially destroy Nikki Haley's chances. So people are asking, why is she still in the race? What happens if something happens to Donald Trump? She would then be a contender. Her name would go before the convention. Of course, her problem is that she is now attacking Trump so vigorously that the Trumpies will not support her. So it's a very interesting dynamic. But Donald Trump, to me, is a disgrace. May I just quickly point out, he has yet to condemn Vladimir Putin, and he has yet to condemn what's happening in Ukraine. And most shockingly, he hasn't even condemned the murder of the leading opposition to Putin in Russia. So this is a man who, to me, is completely morally bankrupt, has no business being president of the United States. And if you don't believe me, talk to the people in NATO. Talk to world leaders who are horrified at the thought that Donald Trump would withdraw from NATO. But Navalny's death, and I want to underline this, Navalny's murder, and I want to give great credit to Karen Reed, a former producer at KGO. When the Navalny story first broke, she said, John, you have to do an hour on it. We ended up doing 3 hours on it. And the reason we did was because there was such interest. But the tragedy here is, his brother is now about to be arrested. His wife has assumed the mantle of leadership, but she is outside of Russia. His daughter, by the way, lives in California. She is a student at UCLA, at least she was. And it is one of the great tragedies. And may I give kudos to Joe Biden, who not only stood up and said what it was, Putin's murdering this man, but also has announced that sanctions, I think it's Friday, stiffer sanctions will be imposed on Russia. Not that it makes a difference. Navalny is dead, but his spirit lives on. And I made a suggestion, we'll see if it is followed up on. Raoul Wallenberg, the great righteous Gentile who saved thousands of Jews in Hungary in 1944 and 45, was then kidnapped by the Russians, died in the Gulag, but was made an honorary U.S. citizen because of Tom Lantos, by the way, a former member of Congress. I think Navalny should also be made an honorary United States citizen. It would be a tribute to his sense, what he tried to do. And I don't know if you watched the CNN special, which won an Academy Award, but I sat here riveted as Navalny essentially outlined the tragedy that was to befall him. And he did it with brilliance, and his family participating. It was really, really a great, great program. Followed, by the way, on CNN by a portrait of Vladimir Putin. Talk about an evil man who ought to be condemned by the world and ought to be exorcised from our world politics. So
let me ask you about that, John, just because you touched on so much. But, the Navalny case and the reluctance of the GOP and the reluctance of Donald Trump to really comment on this and, show any disdain for Vladimir Putin. And as you know, those who are showing up at memorials for Navalny, they're being arrested by the hundreds.
In Russia.
In Russia, I'm talking about, yeah. So it speaks to and reflects the way they squash opposition of any kind, opposition speech. But I want to ask you whether or not you feel these are unwitting water carriers for Russia, the Trumps of the world, the GOP. Are they unwitting, or are they aware that they don't want to run afoul of Putin because they have some other agenda? I don't see the political win for them domestically. So tell me what you think underlies their reluctance to again, condemn what's happened to Navalny?
You left out a third word: fear. Fear. Republicans are afraid of Donald Trump. They're afraid he will primary them, which is what he threatens to do. And that is a critical factor in all of this.
Okay, that's the Republicans, John. Tell me why Trump has been reluctant.
Because
it's money,
Trump loves Putin. Trump has defended Putin. Do you remember when he stood in Helsinki and was asked who he believed, American intelligence agencies or Vladimir Putin? And with Putin standing right next to him, he said, well, I believe Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump is enamored, if you will, of dictators. And the dictator he seems to love is Putin, along with Orban of Hungary and other world leaders. So I can only suggest to you, and I say this with some sadness, the Republican Party needs to stand up and just say no. I can tell you that if previous leaders of the Republican Party were alive and they could hear what Donald Trump is saying or not saying, they'd be rolling over in their graves.
The Trump history, for those who don't know it, prior to being president, but in the ramp up to becoming president, Trump very much had his eyes on Moscow as a place for a Trump hotel. He wanted a Trump hotel in Moscow very badly. And there's every manner of thought and some evidence that back-channeling a lot of these conversations prior to his ascendance to the presidency was a desire to curry favor with Putin and Russian power brokers such that he could get a Trump hotel there in Moscow. So I think it was money. Now, obviously, he has a love of these authoritarians, as you suggested, but I think underpinning a lot of it is basic business. You know, the guy is just...
Fortunately, we don't have to choose one or the other. The cumulative result is that Donald Trump, when it comes to defending America's interest in the world and standing up for freedom, does not represent the best of the Republican Party. Whether it was Dwight Eisenhower or Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan, he simply has abdicated that responsibility. Now, what we'll see in South Carolina, which I would remind you is heavily populated by retired military, whether or not they will respond at the polls on Saturday, giving Nikki Haley the vote instead of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wins in South Carolina and wins decisively in South Carolina, by March 5th, we will have a Donald Trump iron lock on the presidency, that is the nomination of the Republican Party for president. It is, to me, one of the most unfortunate moments in the history of the Republican Party, and certainly one of the most unfortunate moments in the history of the United States. The Republican Party's strength now will be if Donald Trump is defeated, and they have to rebuild themselves. And what we have to hope for is that when the Republican Party rebuilds itself, it will rebuild itself in the image not of a Donald Trump, but of previous Republican presidents like Eisenhower, Nixon, or Reagan.
Abdicate is a ding word. Well done. Now, tell me about what you think may happen in Georgia. This this really speaks to the undermining of the election. Now you have questions surrounding the prosecutor. Give me a moment on that.
The issue is not D.A. Willis. The issue is, did Donald Trump try to interfere in the election? That's what ought to be the question, and I think it should be. No matter what happens in Georgia, this issue will be part of Mr. Smith's case, which is going to be considered in the federal courts, I expect, in the not-too-distant future. There is no doubt about the interference. You could play, as I played repeatedly, the words of the Secretary of State of Georgia, Mr. Raffensperger, in which Donald Trump actually is on tape talking about getting more votes. So that's it. I have to make a comment. I know we're running out of time. I just want to say a word about this case in Alabama.
Well, before you get to the case in Alabama, it's my show, and damn it, you're going to let me do the agenda.
No,
I hate that when you do that.
Why should I
it's
do
outrageous.
that?
They do this to me.
You know, they do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
I have a guest on, and he was a host on his own show. He thinks he can just move the conversation anything he wants. How dare you? How dare you?
It's all right. For what you're paying me, I can do almost anything. Go ahead.
Oh, my God.
Why are you yelling?
Just on the Georgia thing,
yes,
and you mentioned it, which is why I wanted to mention it. You mentioned the federal trial that may get underway, the question of overturning the election. Governor Brian Kemp, who you'll remember pushed back on that intense pressure from Donald Trump to overturn the 2020 election. And there were already results in his state, but he wanted, Trump did, Kemp to come out and say, no, we've got questions about
He was
the
called
count.
as a witness, and he will be called as a witness. I listened to the interview that he did on CNN the other day. Very powerful. And if I were Donald Trump, that's what I'd be afraid of. What happens in the Willis case in Georgia and her personal picadillos it doesn't really concern me. What concerns me is that Donald Trump did try to interfere, that no matter what happens in the Georgia case, he will be cited on that in the federal case, that Raffensperger and Governor Kemp have both been called on to offer information to Mr. Smith. And I fully expect that in the end, it will all come out. You know, I got to say, a lot of people asked us, and I know it's you and me on KGO, what was taking so long? The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but in the end, they will reveal the truth, and it will not be good for Donald Trump.
Well, I hope you're right. I don't necessarily sign on to that. I think these delays can be really, they can cut both ways, though, to be fair. They can cut against Trump.
But I have to believe in the American
Peccadillos is a ding word. I've got to move on, John. How dare you try to seize control again after I've just reprimanded you? It's insane.
Seriously, what the
All right, now Alabama. Talk to me.
Oh, good. Thank heaven. I was hoping Kim McAllister would be here. Because
Teresa is here, and Teresa spoke, I thought, quite well in the first.
Wow. Wow, that was an attack, John Rothman. I hope you're happy. I'm very sensitive.
Let me tell you, I would never attack you. I think the world of you, and we've only just met. But let me indicate to you on this question.
John's making friends today. Go ahead. Yes.
I had a long. He's always interrupting. I had a long debate with Kim McAllister about this because we both have had questions of fertility issues and so forth. And I said to her when Roe v. Wade was overturned, they're going to go after the question of this whole situation dealing with in vitro fertilization. And Kim wasn't quite sure, but I was sure. And I'm going to tell you, this is another great challenge for the Republican Party. The Republican Party runs on a strict pro-life, if you will, platform. And what has happened in Alabama will have far-reaching implications. Personally, I believe that in vitro fertilization is one of the most important single developments in allowing people to have families. And this was a decision that was made by the Alabama court. And if you read the decisions, it's based on religion. It's based on their view of the Bible. Well, I believe in a separation of church and state. And all I can say is now the Republican Party will have to declare itself on another issue. Do you believe that a woman has the right not only to control her own body, which I believe is absolute, but should a woman have the right with her husband to secure the ability to have a child? And so this is going to be something, if you take a look, and I urge everybody, take a look at the religious motivation. I couldn't believe the Chief Justice of that Supreme Court talking about the religious aspects of this, just ridiculous. And I expect this will be a major issue in the election of 2024.
I'm reading, I think I'm rereading this. I believe I read it a long time ago. Fortunately, I can't rember anything, so everything is like being read for the first time.
If I may, Mark,
yes.
The 3 signs of getting older. The first one is, oh, gee, I forgot.
Come on, John Rothman. Let me take my credibility glasses off. But you were talking about religion, the separation of church and state. And, I believe increasingly, and I would say it was almost a creep before, but now it is a full stride. There is a religiosity that is beginning to rule so many parts of America. And the fundamentalism that we're seeing today, I'd suggest to you, is different than just mainstream Christianity. This is a hard right, religious fundamentalist notion as to how religion should inform public policy. And this is just the beginning. It's
I agree.
Scary.
There is a
and I was just
story on
rereading a book
CNN.
essentially that suggests that over time, this, male hierarchy, which claims to speak for the Lord, is going to subjugate women in other ways.
Well, if you check CNN yesterday, I believe, there was a story on how the hard religious right is planning to play a central role in the Trump administration should he become president again. That should scare every single one of us. So I think this is a matter, and if you ask me about the election, if you talk about this question of in vitro fertilization coupled with the question of a woman's right to control her own body, the question of Trump on foreign policy and where he stands on Russia, and you deal with a variety of issues which the Republican Party will now have to face. With Donald Trump as the nominee, I think it gives a big advantage to the Democrats. One other quick point, and that is that if you've been watching and listening to what's happening in South Carolina, the former governor of South Carolina, who is Donald Trump's major opponent, may go down to a crushing defeat, but she is slashing Donald Trump with everything she has. And I would suggest to you that the odds of her supporting Donald Trump in the presidential election, if he's the nominee, I think are limited. So I'm watching that as well.
It's interesting, though. She will not commit to not supporting him. She will not commit. It's odd how she does a two-step on that. Here you are, as you say, she's slashing him, but when he's, but if he's the nomination, will you support him? And she goes, well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to be the nominee, et cetera. You know, typical political response.
Of course. And all I can say is I'll be watching all weekend, because that is going to be one of the most critical moments. And let me just point out to you, then there's the question, if something happens to Donald Trump before the convention, and he has a majority of the delegates, what happens? And this is a great question people are asking. And the answer is that it wouldn't necessarily be an open convention as it was in the old days, because you don't have uncommitted delegates, you don't have favorite son candidates, which means the Republican convention will have a narrow choice. Ron DeSantis suspended his campaign because as a suspended candidate, you can still be viewed as an active candidate. So we now have several of these individuals who are suspending their candidacies. And that would make, and Nikki Haley, if she loses, I don't think she'll withdraw. There's no reason for her to withdraw.
Well, none of them have really withdrawn, even That's the right. ones who have performed, I suppose more poorly than Haley. I'm talking about DeSantis, et cetera. They suspend so that they can jump back in should something happen.
That's exactly correct. And I don't think people understand that. One day, Mark, we should do a commentary or a discussion about what an open convention once was. And it's very interesting. The power of the Republican National Committee is also interesting. Ronna Romney McDaniel is being removed, and Donald Trump is installing as his person someone who agrees in his election lies, along with Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, who will be the co-chair of the Republican National Committee. Do you remember on the ellipse on January 6th when Donald Trump Jr. said the Republican Party doesn't exist anymore, this is the party of Donald Trump? I regret to say he's probably right. And
well, that has the other thing is that Laura Trump's already said that the monies that are raised are going to go toward re-electing Donald Trump, which means...
And paying his legal bills.
Well, that's just what I was saying, which means paying those legal bills.
Of course.
They've got to be paid.
Maybe you should run for president, and then you could raise money, and you could spend the money on the Mark Thompson program, which I know everybody supports. They're all hitting the right button. They're all sending
John. John segues seamlessly. You can see what a fine professional he is to the fact that we are a crowd-funded show. Thank you for that. Look, Nikki Haley is not going to win in South Carolina. You know it as much as I do. It'll be Trump, and it looks like Biden. On your way out here, I have a final question. You're hearing the drum beats for someone other than Biden. You're hearing that from the people who beat the drum better than anybody else. It's lib on lib. It's Democrats on Democrats. And Democrats are saying we need somebody else besides Joe Biden if we want to win. Look at the polls. Most of America feels he's too old. Now, the reality is, given a candidate like Trump, it feels to me like Biden has beaten him and will beat him. But the idea is, and then I'll stop and I'll let you speak, the idea is that the messaging that you need to do and the vitality that's required out there on the campaign trail, he just doesn't have. And so for that reason, he's the wrong candidate. Your thoughts?
People don't vote for, they vote against. And I'm telling you, people will vote against Donald Trump. If Joe Biden is the nominee, he will be elected. He will defeat Donald Trump. Kamala Harris, also vice president. She is not being dumped. She's staying right there despite all this talk about other possibilities. So I have every expectation that Joe Biden, if he can, is going to run the distance. But I will tell you, it's not just that we're voting for a president. You and I will have vigorous discussions about the vice presidential choice. I heard you mention Carrie Lake earlier before we went on the program. She is being seriously considered by Donald Trump for vice president of the United States.
Teresa's seen her as a news anchor. Remember, Teresa, you were telling me she's used to seeing her as an anchor person in Arizona.
And she was defeated for governor.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
But she does have support there. I mean, she's not without some support. Anyway, John.
Well, let me just point out, Teresa clearly has a marvelous career. And Teresa, I think you would be a wonderful candidate for vice president on any ticket.
Wow. He's always.
Thank you so much.
He's a charmer.
I was going to break in with the news that the Department of Justice is putting together a task force to investigate your hijacking of Mark's show.
I got.
Oh my God!
I love
just so long
that.
as you don't have any witnesses. I mean, you have witnesses. I don't want any witnesses because I want all of them discredited the same way is going to happen on the Biden impeachment.
Thompson, party of four.
Okay, I got to get back to my table.
We didn't get to Smirnoff, but it's okay. I
Oh,
understand.
Smirnoff, give me a minute on Smirnoff. Go ahead.
Hey, which one of you is Mark Thompson?
Is the he's the key witness. He's the key witness in the case that the GOP is bringing against Biden and his son.
And what a wonderful witness he is. Turns out he got all his disinformatia from Russia. So all I can tell you is this is just great news for everybody. And I know we have to close. Teresa, you understand. It's not that I want to hijack the Mark Thompson program. It is like every radio talk show host. We are only slightly egomaniacal, and therefore we're always reluctant to give up being the center of attention. But Teresa, may I say it was a high honor and great personal privilege to be with you. Mark obviously has very good taste in people who come in to fill for Kim McAllister. And as for you, Mark Thompson, you are forgiven. And by the way, would you give my warmest good wishes?
Don't talk to me that way.
Good wishes to your parents.
Thank you so much, John Rothman. John,
and don't
Rothman,
forget,
It's so great to meet you.
tell them to hit the right button so they can
yes,
contribute
hit
to the
that
Mark
like
Thompson
button,
show.
right? Hit the like button. It's good. It's good. It's good. Thanks, John.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.